Well, greetings, everyone, and welcome to a very special online event today. It's called Uncover the Hidden Mystical Christos Path in the Gospel of John. Make the leap from uncertainty and fear to deep peace and unity in changing times. My name is Stephen Dunn. I'm the founder and president of the Shift Network, and today is really important for me as well as you, I believe, because we're getting to explore the sacred essence that we often overlook in some of what we've inherited from Christianity. We're going to get to go deep into the mystical truths with a remarkable teacher, author, and pioneer. His name is Alexander John Shaia. He's the founder of Quadratos, Four Paths, One Journey. He's taught for Shift before and really helps illuminate this sort of sacred mystical core that we can find in the Gospel of John. And I think it's going to bring a lot of light into your life and path to explore this. So with that said, Alexander, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Stephen, I'm delighted. I've been looking forward to this for quite a while. Thanks for having me.
Great. Well, super excited to be here. I also want to let everyone know that we are going to have a brand new program with Alexander John. It's called Walk the Mystical Christos Path. So today gives you a little bit of a preview of what's going to be coming in that course. So we'll talk about that at the end of the hour. So, Alexander, why don't you begin our journey with a little bit about your journey? I know that the mystical path is always sourced out of deep personal experience. So maybe share a little bit about your path and particularly what the Gospel of John has meant to you on that path.
There's so many threads that come into this tapestry, and let me just name a few, because this course really is the culmination of 50 years of teaching and professional work. I'm a first-generation Lebanese immigrant. My parents came from Lebanon to the States in the early 1900s. And I grew up in a mystical part of Christianity that was really flowing from the Aramaic language and the poetry of the Middle East. And so the devotion that I have to Christianity is from a very different perspective than most people who grew up in the West. So that Aramaic Lebanese root is the first part. The second is that in learning the Gospels in a different language, I knew that they had a rhythm to it, sort of a breath in it that's below the words themselves. Then I went off to college at the University of Notre Dame, where I was incredibly fortunate to be able to take advanced seminars with this little erudite professor by the name of Joseph Campbell. We're talking the early 1970s. And Campbell at that point was teaching in the theology department. And what he was teaching us is that every great story of transformation, every great story of transformation has four parts to it. And he named this the monomyth, or the one great story that's going on everywhere in the cosmos, though it has hundreds of billions of scripts. Well, I'm hearing about this four-part journey of transformation. At the same time, in my theology classes, I'm learning that early Christianity, 2nd to 7th century Christianity, read the four Gospels in a very particular order, not the order that we find in the Bible. And I began, this is like 1972, and I began to wonder, is there a way that these four texts form a larger story? And if I move forward to the year 2000, finally, there was this eureka moment where I realized that each one of these texts, though we think we're looking at a life story of Jesus, and the texts do come from that life, but they're not told in that way, that the four texts are told as an answer to the four parts of the universal journey of transformation, that each gospel is actually one part of that journey. And when you put the four gospels together, it forms the Christian telling of the same journey that we're all working. After Campbell, I became a Jungian psychologist. I worked in something called sand play. I studied in Switzerland. One of my fields was trauma healing. And throughout all of this, I was hearing this drumbeat that underneath every journey of transformation, at its core, are four parts or four paths that form a whole. But don't think about this whole as something that's one and done. It's cyclical and ever repeating. So really, it's my entire professional life and my childhood rooted in the Middle East Aramaic mysticism, that all of that came together to offer what is the first new understanding of the Gospels in 500 years. We haven't had an understanding of the Gospels other than some part of the life of Jesus since the time of the Enlightenment. And so I'm now offering a mystical way to understand that this text is showing all of us, regardless of tradition, how to walk this path that every one of us is walking by our own metaphor.
Well, it's an amazing blessing that you were gifted with the life path you have to come to that synthesis. I think it would be useful for people to understand, just at least on the broad strokes, those four stages of the hero's journey and how the Gospels line up, and therefore where John sort of emerges in that pattern.
So going back to what I heard from Campbell back in the early 70s, and what's so interesting is that the literature on Campbell doesn't actually encapsulate what I heard from him in those courses. The four-part journey, the four-part hero or heroine's journey, and we have to go beneath the characters because each one of us are going to hear this journey in our own lives with particular aspects. But the first part of the journey for all of us is that we hear the summons to change or grow. And as Campbell would say, we often resist that for a long time. And in fact, Campbell would talk about how the more important the journey is, the more something in us usually resists. Eventually, hopefully, we say an adequate yes, and we move to the second part of the journey, which in Campbell's language was about tremendous trials and obstacles. That it's a real death experience to something in our life, to some part of our desire or wishes, that there's something else that's working on us. The third part of the journey, which is going to be the focus for this course, is what Campbell said: we hear the boon or we receive a gift or a new vision. And what's so amazing about this third part is that it always arrives by surprise. It's never predictable. And it is going to dismantle something of our previous understanding as we move into a larger aspect of life. And then the fourth part, Campbell would say, is when we return to community or return to our ordinary life, but we return now with new gift, new talent, new vision, but it's sort of in promise. And now this fourth part is we have to work with what we've been given to make it serve. It doesn't, even just because we have the vision, it doesn't actualize it into our everyday life. And so this fourth part is actualizing the vision. So the four parts are hearing the summons to grow, facing tremendous trials and obstacles, receiving the new vision or new gifts, and returning to our ordinary life to actualize that vision or gift.
And how do the Gospels reorder to mirror that four-part journey?
Well, what's so interesting is that Christianity knew about the four-part journey long before it chose the gospel text. It actually created the structure of baptism in the 2nd century to be an experience of the four-part journey of transformation. The choice of the Gospels wasn't until the 4th century, but the choice of gospel texts and the ordering in them is exactly that journey which they had already outlined 200 years before. So the first text is the text of Matthew, which is written about the experience of facing change or understanding the needing to grow. The second chapter, and I really think of the four Gospels rather than as separate, I think of them as four chapters of the great story. So the first chapter is Matthew, hearing the summons that we have to grow. The second chapter is Mark, facing tremendous trials and obstacles. The third chapter is John, and that is receiving the new vision, which comes by surprise. You also might even say it's a shattering experience. And then the fourth part is the Gospel of Luke, or the fourth chapter I name Luke, which is about how we take that vision and make it part of our everyday lived reality. So what I'm really saying to my Christian brothers and sisters is, if you understand what Christianity did in the first, second, and third century, there's no mystery about how they chose these four. They weren't choosing the four stories of Jesus. They were really choosing the four accounts of Jesus that give us the universal journey of transformation. What ordered the choice and the sequencing is not the life of Jesus. It is the journey of transformation that every great tradition knows.
Yeah, that's really cool. Why is it that do you think that the last two reversed in the standard presentation?
Oh, good question, Steve. What we have in the Bible is the fourth century liturgical Sunday reading cycle. And when I mean that is, starting in the fourth century, the Christian church read the four Gospels over an identified sequence over 3 years. The first year they read Matthew, the second year they read Mark, the third year they read Luke, but they gave 100 days every year to John. And so they really wanted people to think of Matthew with John, Mark with John, and Luke with John, because John is that ground of being that makes the whole journey worthwhile. And so it's never just change, trial, or service without the being and the joy of John. So they argued about whether they should take John out of the sequence and place it first or place it last, because they wanted people to know that the other three go with John.
Gotcha. But in doing that, they sort of disrupted the hero's transformation journeys a bit. So that's interesting. So one question is that, so if John is sort of like where you receive the blessing, the gifts, the kind of mystical initiation, is it important to prepare for that in the same way that you're going through this arc, so that you're sort of not just focusing on John, but really kind of preparing the groundwork for that blessing?
Yeah, absolutely. John, the third path needs to be situated in the journey. Otherwise, it's like it's like if you're too young and you had a psychedelic trip that just blew you open, but you didn't know what to do with it. You had no way to use it. You had no way to have it really reintegrate your life into this new vision. So the first and second paths prepare us for what arrives in the third path. And then, of course, the third path urges us to do the work of making it everyday and ordinary, which is the fourth path.
Beautiful. Well, that's a great context. So let's talk then about, I'm particularly interested to hear about an understanding of John infused with that Aramaic, more poetic Middle East sensibility. So understanding what's happening there from that kind of a deeper understanding of the language and the purpose of it.
Yeah, my word for the third path is always, it's the beautiful, dangerous. And I don't want people to pull away from this experience. I want them to understand the power of it and how to usefully navigate it. So John has been used for incredible harm. I think most of us probably at this moment know, I don't even need to speak about the ways that John has been used to send Christians into war. John has been used for genocide. And it's all an incredible mistranslation and misunderstanding of the text. John, we believe, is coming out of the community of Ephesus, late first century. Ephesus is the soil of the mother. Ephesus is the center of the feminine. Ephesus has a powerful women's community. And Ephesus is a community that is steeped into the classical Greek language of the first century. But we must understand that the Greek language of the first century is the language of privilege and oppression. It is the language that is breaking us apart. It's the language, the philosophy inside of Greek first century is men and women must compete against each other, and men must win. Heaven and earth must compete against each other, and heaven must win. Light and dark must compete against each other, and light must win, and on and on and on. So if you start out just looking at the Greek that's in the text of John and don't understand the Aramaic Christos, Jesus the Christ, that's underneath that text, you're going to come out with a horrible mistranslation, which is exactly what's happening.
So you essentially kind of create a patriarchal skew by focusing on the Greek language, which has that bias built in, it sounds like.
Totally. And I cannot thank Neil Douglas Klaus enough for his work. Because, I mean, I've been following Neil for 30 years because of my own grounding in Aramaic. But the Aramaic worldview is everything belongs in right relationship. Mm. You could not say anything in Aramaic about light over dark. That would break the cosmos apart. And the cosmos is about how light and dark play together in right relationship. The ground of the feminine, which is the soil from which John grows, is about the fertility of oneness and about how we all have a part in this great play of harmony. Truly, the whole ethos of this mystical text is about how all of us are already one if we could but perceive it and then act upon it. Mm. So there is so much in John. When I look at it in English today, I weep for the harm that it has created so many. And for all of us at this very intense moment on the planet, we need all of our great mystical texts and all of our great spiritual texts to be teaching us about oneness and about how we can achieve it, not just as an ideal, but practically. And that's exactly why this text was composed, because the text is composed in the 90s. And Ephesus heard this teaching about oneness in the 40s, and a small part of Ephesus just exploded in this beatific vision beyond all the privilege and the in and out groups that the city had been so caught in contention. But 50 years later, by the 90s, all of that beatific vision was gone. And even this small Christian community was at war with each other. Men and women were fighting, educated and uneducated, free and slave, and all the old opposites within Ephesus were at each other's throat. And John's text is, remember, experience this beatific vision of oneness. That's the first 2 chapters of the text. But then comes the 3rd to the 11th chapter, which is, here are the meditations and the practices that help you move towards greater oneness. And if you're not moving to greater oneness, then you're moving away from it. There is no way to stay static with the energy of oneness. You're either increasing or decreasing.
Really profound what you're saying, and just that's sort of the root system out of which could have flourished a much more balanced, integrated, mystical culture. But then we kind of created this tilt and overlay and got more combative and competitive and ultimately violent with what this the meaning of this realization. So maybe share a little bit more just about like how to sort of let go of some of the conditioning and that we might have sort of received around that and get back to that sort of authentic mystical transmission that was in the original Aramaic and coming out of Ephesus.
Yeah, so let me add just one more piece, and then we'll do a short meditation. One of the reasons that I use the word Christos rather than what in English we might think of as Christ is that Christos was the word that was chosen for the Aramaic Messiah. And both of these words have a visceral quality in us, which is part of the meaning of the great. The word Messiah in Aramaic, the ending of the name is just simply an out-breath. And that's part of the experience, that the Messiah is the out-breath of the holy from which the whole cosmos has come before the beginning of time. And so when we carry that now into Greek, the choice was to choose the word Christos. And Christos means, literally, it means the same thing as the Messiah, but in Greek, it sounds like a moment in time. Rather than in Aramaic, you understand the Messiah is a breath going across time. And then we lose all of that when we use the word Christ rather than Christos. But through the course, I'll be using Aramaic names because they have a bodiness to them. So instead of Jesus, I will use Yeshua. Instead of Christ, I will use Christos. And I'll help us not just understand the meaning, but also the visceral experience.
So it sounds like the Messiah is that we often think of that as in terms of Messiah as well, or those are different concepts?
Exactly.
And so we kind of turn it into an individual in a point of time versus an out-breath that we're all a part of the divine.
Exactly. That the Christos or the Messiah is that first breath before the cosmos came to be, if you can conceive of that. So one of the ways in my tradition I say that is that when we look out at the cosmos, when we look out at the forest, when we look at our hands, what we're seeing is the visible cells of the great oneness from which we all came.
I just love your perspective. I feel like it's rewiring us just hearing each of these little shifts are turn into big changes in how we relate to what we've inherited here.
Absolutely.
So I think now would be a great time to lead us in a little meditation that helps to activate this.
Here. Come back and be together with all of us here. Be together with Stephen. Be together with me.
Very powerful exercise there. And to really become the alchemists for the pain of the world, to transform that into love and acceptance. Very beautiful.
And here again, most of my brother and sister Christians are reading a very bad translation of this moment on the cross in John, because everybody's reading the text that says, and the Christos bows his head and delivers over his spirit. No. Only the Roman Catholic tradition has maintained the more ancient understanding, which is the word is not his spirit, it is the spirit. Because what makes this scene on the cross true is it's revealing what happens in us on the third path, not being a video cam of that historical moment, but through the power of a third path experience, all of us are enabled to breathe out that new creation, to breathe out love in the face of bitterness.
It connects back to what you were saying before about that we all become that first out breath of the goes through all of time of the creator.
Well, I get so excited because I know that this is a teaching that's in all the great traditions. So this way of understanding the gospel is not as a text of privilege or a text only about history, but it's a living text about what happens here and now in us.
What other, I know we don't have time to go through the entire text of John, and you're going to go much deeper in the practices in your course, but are there some other key shifts of understanding that you really feel are seminal for people to understand to really get at this mystical realization of John?
Um, the prologue of John, I think, and even all the classical scholars of this text will say, everything that John wants to say is in that mystical poetry at the beginning. And the rest of the gospel is really an amplification or a practice of that, of what's been said at the beginning. But our first assumptions are really important to check, because that's where you can be closer to the heart or you move away from it. So most Christians will know that in English we hear, "In the beginning was the Word." Well, first of all, John is reprising the opening of Genesis. And we know from our Jewish brothers and sisters that a better translation of the first line of Genesis is, "In every beginning is," not "in the beginning," but either in a beginning or in every beginning. And John is saying the same thing at the prologue. In every beginning is Logos. Well, what's Logos? Logos is not word. Logos in the Jewish philosophy of the time, and it had already been in use for more than 100 years before it got into this gospel. Logos means veriness, allness, everythingness. So we can understand how, I think, a better translation in English would be something like this: in every beginning is the Holy One's breathing. And you could say is the Holy One speaking, but I think when we think of speaking, it puts us into a cognitive mindset. But when we can interpret this entire mystical text through that first line, in every beginning is the Holy One's breathing. So right now, go look outside, go look at your hands, go look at everything. What you're seeing is the visible manifestation of the Holy One's breath. Mm. And the entirety of this text that we call John is going to amplify and explain and give us practices to deepen in that experience.
Mm. Now, the way you describe that, it just connects directly to all the great mystical poets from around the world, just that seen through the ecstatic eyes of the world suffused with that breath of the divine. It's so wonderful. Are there other areas? I know we said we would look at some areas that some of this misinterpretation can create some other pitfalls for people or potential challenges to avoid with John. So just to kind of be aware of how other things that might be important to kind of get to correct in a way in our understanding, so that we're not falling into some pitfalls with it.
Well, first of all, we're going to touch upon in one of the modules the Book of Revelation, which people thought that the Book of Revelation and the Gospel of John were written by the same John. We now know that they were two separate Johns, but they're writing at the same moment, and they're both speaking about a third path experience, but from different perspectives. And the truth is that when we have a third path moment, if we're not prepared to understand what it's about, our egos become very frightened. I mean, we can talk about in Hindu, this is like when the Kundalini shoots up through the chakras. there's an enormous energy release. And it's an energy that's a much higher charge than everyday life. And we now have to go through practices to step the energy down so that it can be used. We don't want to fry ourselves out like you would fry a computer out by an energy charge. So one of the first things that we must do, and I really say must, because if we're going to move to oneness, we must do this. And that is, we need to use this energy to cleanse and even perhaps deconstruct yesterday's temple. Because when this newness arrives, it's discontinuous change. And this is something our organizations don't understand, our churches, our institutions don't understand. I hope that great spiritual traditions understand this, but in the Christian tradition, when this newness arrives, what do? We want to pull out all about what every other scholar from yesterday has said to try to prove that this new understanding is valid. That's exactly the wrong thing to do, because yesterday's understanding is never going to validate this newness. And so what we have to do is we have to hold yesterday's understanding with great reverence while we gently put it to the side for a few minutes. What we're going to come back to is we're going to come back and discover how yesterday's tradition was holding the seeds of something vital and new, but you can't normally evolve gradually, step by step, from yesterday's understanding to this new point. The third path is a leap in consciousness. And it's a leap that our ego minds get frightful of, because when this leap happens, it lets that small part of ourselves know we're not in control. So much of what I want to share with people is how to navigate, how to use this incredibly beautiful and powerful moment in a way that will keep us growing in oneness. Because if we don't use it, it's going to go behind us and it's going to pull us back, or we're going to gradually slide back. And we're perhaps going to end up in a worse place, believing that oneness is not a reality that we can have. So we're going to, on one of our modules, we're going to look at how in the 3rd chapter of John, right at the beginning of the text, Yeshua, Jesus, Yeshua, is cleansing the temple. What's this about? Because in the historical timeline, we know that this happens very late in the life of Jesus. But you have to keep remembering, these texts are not composed to tell us about that timeline. These texts are composed to teach us about an inner experience and what we need to know about the experience and how to navigate it for our growth. So it's absolutely right that the cleansing of the temple comes in the 3rd chapter of John, because the first 2 chapters have just raised us to the heights of the beatific vision. But John is telling us that vision is not going to take root unless we go back and take out the tendrils of that old worldview that will quietly and perhaps silently pull us back.
You really present so beautifully like the process of evolution of like reverentially holding the old and letting go into the unknown, and the beautiful way to hold it, since versus the kind of more power struggle-y kind of, oppositional energy. There's a deeper surrender in opening to that new possibility. Really beautiful, Alexander. You're just filled with so much wisdom, and really illuminating a much deeper way of engaging the John as mystical text and really what we've inherited reverentially in the Christian tradition, and going into a new unknown. And so let's talk a little bit more explicitly about your upcoming program, since I know this is a really unique opportunity for people who are touched and moved by what you're saying to really make it real and have a rewiring of understanding of the mystical Christos and to understand how to make that real in our lives. So the program that Alexander John is going to be teaching is called Walk the Mystical Christos Path. Draw on the new translation and the Gospel of John to revitalize your spirit and awaken your courage. So it very much builds on the philosophical and spiritual foundations you've heard today and goes much further. And so, Alexander John, I'd love for you to share a little bit about your intentions for the program, and then we'll go through the modules of what people can expect is coming down the road.
To my own Christian brothers and sisters, I hope that you will come to use this text to help us navigate the trials both within our tradition and the world today. This text was composed for this moment. And for anyone of any tradition, I hope that you might join me and learn through a different metaphor the beauty of your own journey. So I see this as an addition to everyone's journey, while it also has a particular impact for those who may be devout Christians.
So this whole program is laid out in detail at Mystical Christos, that's CHRISTOS.com. I should pronounce it closer to the Aramaic, it's Christos, but I'll just say Christos because it's easier, mysticalchristos.com. And so there's more detail here, but let's read out the module titles so you can give us a little preview. So module 1 is called Experience How Earth Embodies the Christos, to feel more connected to the common journey we're all making.
So this module is going to really open up everything that's in that great name, Christos, and also how it is a derivative of the Aramaic Messiah. And when you can understand how these two names hold the one breath sweeping across all time and all space, then we'll have the basis of a journey which we're all walking together.
Module 2, touch the eternal with the 4 paths to ease your anxiety as you understand life in a larger context.
So I want to take this module to really flesh out all 4 paths and then situate the 3rd path as how it grows from the first 2 and then flows out into the 4th. So it'll be a larger experience of the 4 paths, which will be the basis of the rest of our course.
Module 3, experience your own journey of transformation in each moment when you understand the crux of the Christos across human time.
I love this because the cross is a universal symbol. It's a mandala that goes across all human history. 8 to 10,000 years, we've had this incredible image of the cross. And the cross is not exactly what Jesus died on. Jesus didn't die. Jesus died on something that the Romans called the stela, the pole. And so we're going to separate the instrument of death that Jesus died on and this incredible image of wholeness and healing and transformation that has been known across human history, and how it came to be at the very core of the Christian tradition, and how the shape of it has gradually changed over time, but the meaning has not.
Exciting. Module 4, harmonize opposite perspectives and emotions within yourself through the symbolism of the wedding.
So we're going to be looking at the text of the wedding at Cana in the Gospel of John. But we're going to back out from that and look first at the universal experience of wedding, and then bring that down to the mystical wedding in the text. This wedding in Cana is not about a historical wedding, but it's about the wedding of all of us right now.
Module 5, cleanse yourself from yesterday's negativity as you explore the temple that must be deconstructed.
And I've already said a bit about this, but we're going to look at the cleansing of the temple, the conversation or the challenge that Yeshua makes to Nicodemus, and the book of Revelation. All of this is about the good thoughts of yesterday when not reflectively deconstructed will hold us back.
Module 6, explore the history of the well and apply its lessons to your life so you can experience the radiance of those around you.
Well, first of all, remember that this text is composed for the community of Ephesus, which has this vibrant, powerful women's community. That's the woman that's sitting at the well with Yeshua. And so we're going to talk about the well as it's known across great world traditions. And we're going to talk about the conversation between Yeshua and the respected, powerful other, and what happens when deep, true conversation between two takes place.
And finally, Module 7, walk through the garden of resurrection and return to your true self.
So there's a beautiful piece about this text of Mary Magdalene, or Miriam of Magdala, in the garden. And that is that at some point, she has to turn away from the tomb. And when she turns away from the tomb, she sees the Christos. And this text of the resurrection garden in John is the summation text. It brings together all of John's mystical themes. But it also reprises how we have to turn away from yesterday's tomb to see something far brilliant and wonderful for today and tomorrow.
Well, what a poetic and perfect way to close the 7-week journey. And again, there's more detail laid out at mysticalchristos.com, Christos, mysticalchristos.com. So in addition to the 7 live teaching modules, which really are going to create a unique opportunity to commune with other people, to engage in practices together, to receive these teachings, and also to ask questions of Alexander John, you're also going to get recordings of every session, both video and audio, so you can access this wisdom for years to come. Word-for-word transcripts to work with, study, and highlight. There's weekly practices you can do at home, as well as a Facebook community to support you and deepen your experience. And that often can be a very powerful part of the program, is to really connect with others who are on this mystical path with you. In addition, on the page, you'll see there's a number of extra bonuses that Alexander John has offered to enhance your journey. There's a video teaching called In Freedom and Safety, the Rich Soil of Transformation. Alexander, you want to say more about that?
This is really the ground of everything that I do. It's the ground of all solid transformation, is that we come and stand in the place of safety, which means in a place of respect and a place of freedom. And that freedom is not in terms of our outer behavior. That freedom is that each one of us is totally free to explore that place inside wherever we need to go. So I want to talk about how so many great traditions know this, because it's really what makes the relationship that leads to transformation happen. Too oftentimes we've thought that you transform people to form relationship, and actually the great journeys say you create the relationship of freedom and safety that powers the journey of transformation.
What a beautiful extra bonus. There's another bonus as well that it's called Meditation 2 Royal Methods. You want to share a little bit more about that bonus?
I do, and the 2 methods are the meditation of no thingness and the meditation with thingness. Now, they have classical names. The no thingness is oftentimes called the apophatic practice, and the with thingness is called the cataphatic practice. I'm Middle Eastern, and Middle Eastern meditation is largely with things. We love smells and bells and the garden, and items and imagery, which leads us through the myriad ideas to the one. Whereas the apophatic is clear out the many things to the one. Both are royal paths to the same source. I want to talk about how the apophatic practice works as we lead the one source, and how the cataphatic method leads to the same source. And I'm really passionate about this because too many people today are teaching that the apophatic is the primary and the cataphatic is supplementary. No, they are equal. And I think probably great people will join the two in their own unique recipe. But the cataphatic is not less than, it's just misunderstood.
A great example of embodying that non-competitive complementary philosophy at the root of the transmission here from the Aramaic. There's also, I want to draw attention to one extra bonus. This is our special bonus that you get when you sign up right away. We always like to do this as a way to really encourage you to take the time and tune in, read through the page at mysticalchristos.com, and really just get a sense if this is the right next step for you. We welcome you to sign up today, and you'll get an extra bonus if you do so. This is a video teaching from Alexander John called The Universal Rhythm in Everything. I'll share a little bit more about that.
Yeah. You heard a little bit about that today in talking about the Christos, but there is a universal design that every practice of transformation has. If it misses a step, the journey's incomplete. And so I want to lay out this universal design, and I want to help, I want us to enjoy how it's underneath the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism, how it's in the core story of the coming out of Egypt for Judaism, how it's in one of the great indigenous myths for me is the Dine Bahane of the Navajo. Wherever you are, whatever your story, whether you're a shamanic practitioner or Baha'i, this is the design that we are all walking by. We're already doing it. If we could but step away from the particular characters that set our heart on fire and realize it's all the same journey. And we're all walking each other home by the same journey.
Well, what a tender and beautiful way to approach life. So thank you, Alexander John, for that special bonus, the Universal Rhythm in Everything video teaching. Well, it's truly going to be such a sacred and beautiful program. It's really clear from just talking with Alexander John just how much this lives in his heart and how much it's been a fruition of his entire life path. And so you're really going to be blessed, I believe, by this program. And we've kept the investment very accessible. It's just 3 payments of $128, or you save 10% when you pay in full with one payment of $349. The course is going to begin November 12th and run Tuesdays at 9 Pacific, noon Eastern. But even if you can't make the live times, you can still get the full value with the recordings, the transcripts, and the community as well. And I encourage you also to read through some of the testimonials. There's really beautiful from previous programs. My heart has been transformed. I'm grateful. Beautiful soul expanding course. Beautiful view into history and the actual historic Christmas, solstice, and Yule. Sensitively and compassionately offered with guidelines for tangible practice and expression. Really beautiful testimonials from the power and depth of what Alexander John is bringing forward. So again, all the details are at mysticalchristos.com, and you'll get that special bonus when you sign up by midnight, which is the Universal Rhythm in Everything. So Alexander John, we're almost at the end of our time together. What a beautiful hour with you. There's such a peace and depth and radiance that comes from you and sharing the fruits of your study and practice in this area. So thank you for bringing this authentic transmission of the Christos alive for us. Anything that's still on your heart you want to share with folks who are considering doing the full course with you?
Well, this course is going to be running in November and December. We are going to take a short break at around Christmas, and our last module will be in January. But I would really invite you to come. Let's breathe that new creation as we're, for those of us in the Northern Hemisphere, as we're in the dark season. It would be an honor to show you a radiance that lives in your heart. And that radiance can heal us in these intense days.
Beautiful. Well, Alexander John Shaia, you've really been opening our hearts and opening our vision and rewiring us around this beautiful transmission of Christos. So thank you so much for this hour, and thank you all for joining. And if you'd like to go further with Alexander John, you can do so at mysticalchristos.com, and you will get that special bonus when you sign up by midnight, which is the universal rhythm in everything. Thank you so much. Many blessings.